Hello there and welcome to episode 31 of the Unqualified Opinion Sports Podcast. I'm your host as always, Marko Yerkovich. We've got a very special episode in which we actually have three of us on at the same time, joined as always by Will Byerman.
Glad to be back in the booth with my boy, Tim Seipel, despite all of his more interesting takes. Shout out to Bam Adebayo.
And it's time to boogie.
Yeah, so we've got a lot of great stuff for you guys today. Of course, we've got some NBA bubble news. Of course, the big, some might call it an upset, but the 3-1 comeback by Denver against the Clippers. We'll discuss that. We'll discuss our reactions from the week 1 of NFL action. And of course, my power rankings will make a return, and so will the mockery of them. And we'll be talking the Big Ten, playing college football again, at least for now. Some weekly pick'ems later with Paul Hires, and of course, talking European soccer to wrap things up with Joseph Arena. So let's get right into it, guys. And obviously, the first question is, how big of a disappointment were the Clippers this season, Will?
Probably one. I agree with Stephen A. It was probably one of the biggest disappointments in the league this year because aside from the Clippers individually, we've been hearing about this huge battle for Los Angeles since Paul George and Kawhi made that surprise move to the Clippers. Everyone's saying, "Oh, it's gonna be Clippers-Lakers in the conference finals, and it's gonna be a game for the ages." All season long, people have been saying, debating, from the Nuggets standpoint, I can see where they'd be extra frustrated before the start of the series because nobody really gave anybody but these two teams a chance to even make it this far. There's a little bit of buzz for Portland in there, but the only matchup people have been wanting to see in the Western Conference Finals have been Clippers-Lakers. Personally, I'm happy to see the Nuggets there. I'd rather see them than the LA team, but most people feel like we were kind of robbed of something special.
Right. Tim, your thoughts on the letdown of the Clippers here, and I guess in the regular season, but especially here in the playoffs?
I mean, when you have two All-Stars in Paul George and Kawhi Leonard,
2-6 man of the year.
I mean, how many points did they score yesterday? What, 24, 26, something like that?
I believe 25 combined or 24 combined.
Zero in the fourth, though.
That is unacceptable as a team. I mean, especially in Game 7 of a series where you're already been up 3-1. You're expecting those guys to come out firing, and they just came out flat. They didn't have anything going for them. And you could just really tell the momentum was all with the Nuggets. Even when they were down 12, the Nuggets were down 12 towards the end of the second half, and then the Nuggets pulled within 2 right before the half ended. And it was just crazy to watch that turnaround because after that, it was all Nuggets. It was all Jamal Murray. Jamal Murray with a fantastic second quarter, but I mean, the Clippers just completely gave this away, and it was a huge disappointment for the Clippers fans, especially.
So obviously, this is a big disappointment for the Clippers, at least, blowing a 3-1 lead in the conference semifinals for the second time in 5 years. Still yet to make it to the conference finals, even as a franchise in 50 years. So LA, at least for the Clippers, it's a relatively large disappointment. It's some of the most high expectations they've had in quite some time. But I just want to take a step back and look at the larger picture here. So the Clippers last offseason, they traded for Paul George, and they traded Danilo Gallinari, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, and 4 first-round picks and some rights to some pick swaps. So let's just essentially call it their entire future for the next 7 to 8 years. So are the Clippers in trouble if they don't win the finals next year, considering that Kawhi and PG are on expiring deals?
Now, I think the one thing to add into that Paul George trade was it looks terrible if it's just for Paul George, but at the same time, people were even saying then, you make that trade knowing that Kawhi Leonard, while not included in the deal, he was a part of that.
You are trading for Kawhi Leonard, yeah.
You are trading essentially to get Kawhi Leonard because there was an arrangement that he would be joining the Clippers, and that's like the best star that Clippers have ever had. And you really have to look at the Clippers as just probably the most miserable franchise in basketball. We give the Knicks most of that crown usually, but the Clippers, the Knicks have had success in the 70s. They've had a little bit of success in the 90s. If I say Los Angeles Clippers, I'm pretty sure a casual fan can't really mention anyone except Blake Griffin's dunks. And even we look at Lob City, that was a massively disappointing collection of
mess,
talent.
too,
it was a mess,
as far as personnel
It
and
ended
success.
in a mess. It was a mess on the court at times. They never really equated to big wins there. Kawhi and Paul George are under so much pressure because the Clippers as an organization are under so much pressure. because they're really staking everything on this team being able to finally like show the Lakers. The Lakers are their biggest rival, but if you told the Lakers that, they'd be pretty surprised. Like they're not just trying to remain relevant in the league. They're trying to stay relevant in their home market, in their own stadium, and they need to make a big move quick with a team this talented. I really do think it's kind of championship or bust next year.
Yeah, I don't love the words pressure because these guys are getting paid millions of dollars to play in a game that is extremely high pressure anyway. Obviously, there's a lot coming with the Clippers franchise, especially since they haven't made it to the finals before. Have they made it to the conference finals?
No, never.
They've never. So with that point, I mean, obviously there is going to be a little bit more pressure, but this is something that they're paid to play through. And if they can't do that, then maybe they shouldn't be with the Clippers, you know, and obviously that's an extreme. But I do think, you know, if they don't do much this next year, if they don't make it to the conference finals at least, you know, I think there's going to be an evaluation of what is the plan for the Los Angeles Clippers.
Right, and that goes into what I would get into next. Considering Steve Ballmer bought this franchise about 5 or 6 years ago for $2 billion, he's planning on completely reinvigorating the franchise with the new stadium and technically the new city, you know, in Inglewood with the new stadium, and they're going to turn it into a basketball mecca, as he is so called. And he was hoping to raise a few banners along with it, right, to instill some semblance of culture and success into this franchise. So certainly, obviously, a lot of pressure, not just specifically on the players, but on the franchise as a whole to finally find some success. Just something really quick. I'd like to mention the fact that Doc Rivers may be on the hot seat next year.
I was waiting to talk about that. Like, if you start to look at the collections of talent Doc has had in the Clippers and not done much with, like,
or his whole career, the fact that he's only been to the finals twice and only won once, with the collection of rosters he's had in his tenure as a coach for, technically, I think this is either his 20th or 21st season. He's coached the Magic from 99 to 03, and then Boston from 04 to 12, and then at the Clippers since 2013. And the fact that he's only been to 2 finals,
I mean,
ridiculous.
I don't know if I would put this past series on Doc Rivers. I mean, I think it just showed how the Clippers just didn't come ready to play. I mean, obviously there's a certain amount of blame that can be put on him. But when your 2 superstars come out and combine for 25 points in one game, that's disgraceful. You're not going to win if your 2 superstars who you're paying millions of dollars don't come out in a high-pressure game and perform at a high level.
I tend to agree with you. The one thing I would say is when you looked at the way Denver played, Mike Malone and his 2-man system with Jamal Murray and Nikola Jokic, and Jokic is you know, the secondary ball handler in a sense is the second option, but then he becomes the facilitator. They have a very specific offensive system that is geared towards their players. And I think with the Clippers, it's partially due to the fact that not everyone played all season, and it was really mishmash the whole year with who was sitting out and who was injured. And even once we got to the bubble, they were very lackadaisical about hitting a rhythm. They had no clear offensive system because of this. They just played hero ball. They threw it to Kawhi or PG or Lou Will and just told them to make things happen. They had no secondary ball options, and there's really no offensive system built by Doc Rivers.
Well, one thing to talk about, too, is their bench, which everyone had been talking about how this is the deepest, most experienced team in the league. If you look at the bench stats within this game, Montrezl Harrell had 20, but Lou Will, 3 for 11, 7 points. The only other player besides Harrell and Lou Will to play more than, 7 minutes was JaMychal Green. This bench got continuously exposed, and Williams looks like a liability on offense and defense. Harrell was a liability on defense at times. This whole roster just kind of fell apart. And that's what I'm saying with Doc Rivers, Tim. If you're a coach, you have to kind of understand, it doesn't matter how good you're, you could be coaching up a terrible team and getting them to the 3rd seed consistently, but at a certain point, if you have a good record, but you're not winning at all, you get a longer stay as a coach because of that, but you're going to eventually be the one to take the blame.
Right, and that's the thing with Doc Rivers. I don't think there's no way he'll get fired this offseason. I'd be very surprised. But I do think the pressure is on. If they don't make it to the conference finals or maybe even the NBA finals, with the amount of money and resource and expectation that's being pumped into this team, that would be a huge letdown. But I do want to go back to that PG-13 trade for a minute and look at another team that went all in on this season, or at least from their vantage point, they were going all in. And so considering these happened at about the same time, and they both involve the Oklahoma City Thunder, who now are sitting on a draft capital that could potentially be a gold mine relative to what the Boston Celtics had in the mid-2010s. What was worse, in your opinion, the PG-13 trade or the Russ trade after one season?
It's difficult to say because, again, I do include Kawhi joining the Clippers as part of that trade.
Of course.
And there's also like different expectations by the time we got to the playoffs. Like the Rockets really, I feel like by the second round, like nobody was really that interested in the Rockets. Not interested, but like
we also expected them to lose in the second round, right? Did anyone expect them to beat the Lakers?
Expectations for the Rockets were pretty much gone by the time we got to the playoffs. The Rockets are a pretty big candidate for a total rebuild now. D'Antoni, we talked about this last week, Marko. D'Antoni has officially said he's not coming back. He's going to be a free agent.
And Tillman Fertitta has also confirmed that Daryl Morey is secure and will help in the selection process of the next coach, which is interesting.
Again, but Fertitta kind of handcuffs the whole team just because he is unwilling to get near that luxury tax standpoint. So that'll hurt Morey a bit. But the Rockets, Westbrook, they brought in Westbrook. That was a total desperation move at that point because the Rockets are they don't have much cap space, and they chase stars, and they thought that Russell Westbrook would be everything he was for the Thunder, just on the Rockets, and that would somehow equate because D'Antoni's a coaching wizard. If you look at the roster, there's not much to it outside of those two players, and Westbrook really just kind of choked in the playoffs there, so I could really see this team getting completely torn down now with their revolutionary coach gone. Harden's kind of a one-man army for most of the playoffs, and it looks like that's how it's going to be for the rest of the time.
Right, and so that's the issue with the Rockets. The usage of Harden and Westbrook combined is about 95% of the usage for the team. You'd say that the Russ trade is worse. I tend to agree. I would honestly right now rather have a 35-year-old Chris Paul over a 31-year-old Russ because of just the system and the way Chris Paul is able to play and play with others.
Chris Paul wins games.
So as far as Tim, your thoughts on the trade, which do you think was worse?
Right. I mean, I think Will kind of nailed it on the head. I mean, you got to keep in mind that Kawhi came along with the trade, whether or not.
Right. Well, they're not allowed to say, but we all know.
Right. But I mean, with the Rockets, when it comes down to the nit and gritty of it, James Harden is as long as James Harden is on the Rockets roster, the Rockets will not make it to the NBA Finals and maybe not even the conference finals again. I personally believe that. I think that James Harden, although he's an all-star, although he's one of the best scorers in the league, he has there's a certain liability with him where, it costs a lot of production. When he has a bad game, the whole team has a bad game.
Massive point there. Yeah,
absolutely. Just it destroys the team to the point where they're relying on one player to produce every single time they walk out on that court. And because of that, I think they just gotta clear everybody out. They gotta trade some guys. I think they should trade Harden and rebuild. Because honestly, I don't see them going much further than they've already gone before, unless they get rid of them.
That's interesting, and a lot of people would maybe say to move Russ, but I mean, good luck moving Russ, considering the Rockets to literally have none of their draft picks for the next 6 years. So let's look at the other side of this Clippers-Denver matchup. And really quick, I just want to throw something out here. What do the 1979 Washington Bullets, the 1997 Miami Heat, and the 2003 Orlando Magic have in common with the 2020 Denver Nuggets? That's that all of these teams were down 3-1 in multiple playoff series, but the Denver Nuggets have now further elevated themselves from that group as the only team to win the second 3-1 series deficit. All those other teams lost that second series in 5. That just shows you the improbability of what Denver has been able to facilitate here in the bubble. Does that have a factoring in it? I'm not sure. But what I do know is this Denver team really does not go down without a fight. What are your guys' expectations for this Denver team for the remainder of the playoffs? And then just maybe expounding upon that, what can they be in the future, however far down the line you think that future is?
Well, I mean, not to diminish what Denver's done, but I mean, it's really just amazing to see them come this far. Like, I know you and me, Mark, have been talking for months now about how, like, this Denver team they're a good we were talking about how they're a good regular season team, but we didn't know what they do in the playoffs. We didn't know which players around Jokic.
Yeah.
Would
certainly
step
seeing
up
a
as
new
stars.
Jamal Murray.
So we've seen a new Jamal Murray. Gary Harris, who I've talked a lot of trash about, has really kind of stepped up as a defender. Like, the Nuggets really came together as a complete team. I really honestly, though, can't say I can forecast like what they become in the future, because they still need, like, they're still in the Cinderella standpoint. And obviously, like, if they come out and shock the Lakers, that's a completely different story. But I feel like right now, I don't really think anyone's deep down taking them that seriously as a championship contender right now still. So I think for the future, we're going to need to see, one, Jamal Murray, like, continue this high level of play in the regular season. And I think Michael Porter Jr. is going to have to take that big step he's always talking about. He's been talking about how he wants more minutes, wants more shots. He's going to have to consistently come in and earn that over a full season too. But the Nuggets' potential is definitely looking astronomical right now.
Yeah, I definitely think that the help of Michael Porter Jr. has been really, like, that's been kind of a key base for the Nuggets in some games where maybe Murray hasn't been performing at a high level as he did yesterday. But I mean, even if you look at Jokic, I believe he had over 20 rebounds, 14 points, and over 10 assists. I think he had a triple double yesterday, and he's just performing at a really high level because every time they get the ball in the paint, he's kicking it out because he's getting double teamed. And then you're always leaving one guy open. And that's where Gary Harris has been performing. That's where Jamal Murray has been performing. I mean, this team looked really good playing from behind. They didn't get kind of sucked in and disappointed. They kept on moving forward, and they came back and they just took control of the game. So I think the Nuggets can be really good. I think they're one good player away from becoming a championship contender. I think right now, against the Lakers, I don't see them putting up much of a fight. I can see it going into a game 6, but not much further.
So the point you made is pretty important there, that I think they're one player away from being really good. I'm not sure how that affects their Lakers series, because the Lakers are a few players away from being really good too, which is the weird thing about the West. There's so much good talent, but it's a bit more dispersed than it's ever been, which is fascinating. But as far as the Nuggets, I do think Jokic and Murray and Michael Porter Jr. are good building blocks. If they can somehow swing Gary Harris and Will Barton and a pick for a really, really solid starter / role player 3-and-D guy, they're probably one of the best teams in the West next year. I do feel like they might be a year away still. I know we keep saying that, but a year away from at least finals contention, but who knows? But as far as their potential in the future, this sounds a bit lofty, and just let me preface it with it's lofty, but they certainly have the players with the age, with the mentality and the play style and the coaching style to make this work. I'm not saying they will be as successful, but they could turn into a Spurs type team, a Spurs like organization, just in the way they play. They're unselfish basketball. They're egoless. They are completely team oriented, and the way they play and the way they pass just reminds me of the Spurs. I don't think it's that lofty. Like we said, the Nuggets are a really good team. They might have a little bit more to go, but certainly it hasn't shown that far in the playoffs. They're willing themselves to victory. So with that, let's move into our week 1 NFL reactions. Give me a quick biggest surprise of week 1 from both of you.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's got to be the Cardinals, coming in and beating the 49ers. The 49ers didn't look as good as they did last year, kind of like a Super Bowl slump. For me, I think the Cardinals came out, they played really well on the defensive end, and the offensive end just did enough to really push them past the 49ers. So that was probably my biggest surprise for the week.
For me, it's the Washington football team.
WTF.
Who I really thought, side note, I really thought they were going to come up with some sort of name, some sort of logo.
I'm good with calling them the WTFs.
It's going to be a lot more prevalent in the next couple weeks, because the biggest surprise for me is that they won a game. And it's really just because the one thing people have said about the WTF that has really turned out to be true was that their defensive line was absolutely dominant. They hit Carson Wentz 8 times. Now, granted, they're going against 38-year-old Jason Peters, who just converted back to left tackle after playing guard for all of the summer, but they got to the quarterback early and often. They beat up Carson Wentz pretty bad. They looked absolutely phenomenal on defense. Haskins did just enough. He didn't look great, but he did just enough to kind of keep them in this game. I did not expect them to come anywhere close to the Eagles, but they came back and did it.
So I agree with Tim on my biggest surprise. I know we discussed putting the Cardinals as my 7th wildcard team, and as you guys well know, I didn't choose that. I actually went with the Eagles, which is looking foolish now, but it's certainly looking likely that the Cardinals could be a playoff team. And again, it's very early, but they did just beat, the reigning NFC champ, and they do look good. They have a lot of flaws, but if as far as playmaking and the defense doing enough, they seem to be a team that has some level of potential. So Tim, your biggest disappointment of week 1?
Yeah, I mean, I know this is kind of, I feel like it happens every year. It's got to be the Cowboys for me. I mean, to have such a versatile offense, we talk about it every year, so I'm going to keep it short and sweet because I'm sure everybody's heard this bit. But the most talented offense in the league, and they just did not look like it against the Rams. I mean, you had Aaron Donald just dominating. I think he had pressure about 30% of the time, which is insane for a defensive lineman. And so I was kind of shocked that the score was what it was, and the Cowboys just underperformed and they were a disappointment. So I think a lot of the game time decisions that Mike McCarthy made were really questionable and just not smart. And it all kind of combined for a really disappointing, or maybe as some people call it, a regular Cowboys game.
Will?
I don't consider the Cowboys game a disappointment. I consider the loss more of a joy or a highlight for my weekend. But I'd say the biggest disappointment for me, at least, it's kind of a tie. So I'm just going to go real brief about both of them. One, my boy Joe Burrow. He was obviously a learning experience, a rookie quarterback. But no, Tim, don't give me that look.
Hold the phone.
You put the phone down, Tim. My boy Joe Burrow came out and he had an up and down game as rookies do, especially since he had no preseason. But he led that team on an amazing drive, and then their kicker shanked a 30-yard field goal. That was my big disappointment. Then the other one, Browns, doing Brown stuff. I think Odell and Baker isn't working. I don't know if Baker's to blame. I still believe in Baker to some degree, but there's some stuff that has to change. And I think Odell Beckham kind of needs to get over himself at this point. People are always complaining about they're like, he just has to have a great quarterback he can click with. And I'm like, if Odell is the receiver he says he is, it should not matter who's throwing him the ball.
He had Eli Manning for a couple of years. I mean, Eli Manning towards the end of his season, or towards the end of his career, was abysmal. And
yeah, but if Odell is the greatest receiver in the league, like he continuously says he is, it really shouldn't matter if it's Eli or Baker throwing the ball, because Odell, it's not like he's not getting targets. He's just not doing anything with it.
Well, I tend to agree with you, Will. I think, yes, the Ravens are a tremendous team, but to lose by 32 and in such an uncompetitive fashion, I thought that was really disappointing from the Browns. Tim, you mentioned the Cowboys. I thought that was a really interesting one. The Buccaneers, you can't really fault them. They're trying to integrate a quarterback into a new system. We're just running through a couple of them here.
You could throw the Colts in there.
Colts, that was where I was going next. Unlike you guys, I had no faith in Phillip Rivers. So I can't say I was surprised by the Jaguars winning, but I really thought, even though I have, the Colts being a 6-10 team, I certainly thought two of their victories would come against the Jaguars. And then the last one, of course, two individual performances. DeAndre Swift, I'm sorry, dropping the touchdown pass. Sorry to go there. But the one that's far worse than that, even though that was a game deciding, play, that was one mistake. Mm-hmm. It's forgivable. They should have tried, they should have scored so many other times. I hate when we blame guys just because it happened at the end. There were, plenty of other drops or mistakes that happened. But oh my goodness, Steven Gostkowski.
I was waiting for that.
Needing to retire. Missed 3 field goals and an extra point. Did come through at the end, but does he look washed up or what?
I mean, it's his first game back. I'm going to give some grace until I see this consistently happening. But man, if he did not make that game-winning field goal, he was out.
He would have been cut on the spot, but it also would have been one of the funniest moments in NFL history.
Boy, man.
Easily one of the weirdest situations where you have an an NFL Hall of Famer, a future NFL Hall of Famer, just absolutely miss 3 kicks and 4 kicks.
It
Even.
looked pretty ridiculous. So enough of the highs and the lows here. Let's get into my power ranking. So I'll go from 10 to 1. I'll let you guys react. So at 10, I have the Arizona Cardinals. And I know it's a bit premature. And like Tim said, they still have a lot to fix. But I think with Kyler Murray running the system and with Cliff Kingsbury running the offense, the defense really just has to do enough. The fact that this team put up 24 points against the San Francisco 49ers and put up well over 350 yards can tell you enough. This team, I don't envision them being in my top 10 every week or even at the end of the season, but this performance warrants some level of recognition. 9, I have the Pittsburgh Steelers. Certainly a team that I had making the wild card spot, being decently competitive, but I certainly don't see them, being a huge challenger in the playoffs, but a very solid team. A top 5 defense and a very serviceable offense with some decent skill position players. And we'll see how much Big Ben can hold up. 8, I have the New England Patriots. Certainly not what they were last year, but Cam Newton has shown that they have a different dimension to this offense. The defense seems to be serviceable enough to get them where they need to be. And we'll see how long it takes the NFL to figure out this Cam Newton system, this Cam Newton offense in New England. If the NFL figures it out and can stop it, then New England's chances of accomplishing anything this season are over. But if they can keep things fresh, keep things new, then they could continually challenge the NFL. 7, I have the Buffalo Bills. I have them just above the Patriots just based on their performance. I think the Bills had a more thorough and balanced performance. I also think the Bills' defense, considering the Patriots, guys that opted out, I think the Bills' defense is now clearly a few steps better than the Patriots' defense. And Josh Allen seems to be developing into a very nice dual-threat quarterback, although his passing still needs some work, considering, it was a great performance, but it was against the Jets. So let's slow it down a bit there. 6, I have the Packers. I think Aaron Rodgers is spectacular. I don't know how good this Packers team is, but the fact that the Vikings kept coming back and nipping at their heels, and Aaron Rodgers just kept absolutely obliterating what we perceive to be a very solid defense. That was surprising. 5, I have the 49ers. Not the way they wanted to start their season, but I think Arizona will prove that is not a bad loss. I think Arizona will be a very solid team this season. And also, I hate to judge a team just on one game, considering, it's not an excuse because everyone went through it, but we do have to, like you said, with Gostkowski, give a bit of grace. These guys haven't exactly been as prepared as they've been in the past. So 4, I have Seattle, just above their NFC West rivals. Just an unbelievable performance by Russell Wilson, somehow making that Aaron Rodgers performance the second best of Sunday. He had the 3rd or 4th highest completion percentage of anyone who's thrown more than 20 passes in a game. Unreal. And then 3, you have the Saints. The Buccaneers are a really, really good team, and they'll be even better later in the season once they get some things figured out. And the fact that they could have potentially blown them out if a few things had gone their way a bit more. Michael Thomas, that injury is slightly concerning, but overall, a great team. 2, I have the Ravens. I'd love to put them at 1 based on that performance, but obviously you have to look back at what happened at the end of last season and judge them based on that, at least for the time being. Ravens are 2, just because the Chiefs, number 1, did play a tremendous game against the Texans. A little applause from Paul Hires. I won't remove the Chiefs from number 1 until they give me cause to. No matter how good the Ravens are, if the Chiefs continue to do their job, they're still the number 1 team in the league. Your guys' thoughts?
I think the 49ers are, even before this loss, the reason I'm not all in on the Cardinals there is I really am not expecting much from the 49ers yet. I think they're going to be a factor come playoff time, but I'm expecting a pretty slow start from them. Steelers, I think, should be higher than Patriots for sure. I mean, they have way more potential for improvement. If Roethlisberger gets it going, like he's been able to in the past, even no matter how old he gets, he's usually stayed pretty consistent. He can put up some big passing numbers. I just think they have a phenomenal defense. TJ Watt's dark horse defensive player of the year candidate for
Steelers were just smothering. They were just smothering it.
I think there's just a lot more potential for the Steelers. I think the Patriots, like, they really didn't wow me, and they're playing the Dolphins. And the Steelers wowed me. Buffalo Bills wise, I think Josh Allen looked absolutely great. And the game was a lot more of a blowout than, like, the final score looks decently close, but.
And that also goes with the Pittsburgh and the New England games. They were blowouts, but there were just like N'Keal Harry fumbled out of the end zone. Pittsburgh took their foot off the gas. New York scored late. Those 3 games, like you said, are definitely more blowouts than they look.
Packers wise, you talk about how the Vikings have a rock solid defense. I will say, and this isn't a slight against Rodgers, but the Vikings cornerback situation and their safety situation outside of Harrison Smith.
They were attacking a rookie cornerback pretty hard. And I mean, when you have Devontae Adams on a rookie, I mean, and then even MVS and Alan Lazard, I mean, I think that's a mismatch, especially when you have Aaron Rodgers at quarterback. I mean, I think he's back.
I'm just saying you shouldn't be able to expect MVS and Alan Lazard to, like, do what they did or come close to doing what they did on a weekly basis. Aside from that, though, your top 4 looks really good. I agree. Like, I think the Ravens are the most impressive team by far, but it'd be unfair to annoying folks such as Paul Hires to take the Chiefs out of that number 1 spot.
Well, you also have to respect the Chiefs. They are the reigning Super Bowl
champs. It's unfair to take them out of that
let
top
them be number
spot
1, considering they had a great Week 1 performance. Tim, any issues with the list?
Yeah, I definitely think there are 2 teams that two teams that are missing and 2 teams that are in that shouldn't be. The first team is the Patriots. They beat the Dolphins. They scored 21 points. You know, for me, that's not a win that I look at and say, wow, that's a team that should be in the top 10. A team that, for me, I think should be put ahead of them, or maybe even in that spot, is the Titans, the Tennessee Titans. I know it didn't look great. It wasn't a beautiful win, but they won. And as long as they're feeding Derrick Henry, I think they can easily get back into winning their conference.
And they're playing a really good team, too. I have really high hopes for the Broncos. I think the Titans absolutely should be on there.
Without Von Miller, I mean, the Broncos defense, Broncos could easily be a top 10 team if they have Von Miller.
And that's why even last week when we were discussing the AFC wildcard teams, I would have had the Broncos at 7, and then I took them off as soon as Von Miller had that season-ending injury. So yeah, that's the top 10, and yeah, a few hiccups in there. Again, I will add some honorable mentions to the list once we have a few more weeks of data and stats and scores and results. But for the time being, yeah, that's my top 10. So let's head into some big college football news. Of course, the Big Ten voting on Tuesday to return to action. They will be returning, I believe it's August 27th. Or not August, October.
August 23rd. October 23rd.
So they will then be playing it, hopefully, an 8-week season, leading into a Big Ten championship game the day before the College Football Selection Committee's final rankings come out. So they're leaving very little wiggle room here. Only 8 weeks for 8 games. Any postponements will most likely end up in cancellations because I don't see the College Football Playoff being willing to delay, considering it's a cumulative vote of all the conferences. So a lot of big, interesting things going on there. So how does the return of the Big Ten impact the college football playoff picture and the larger college football landscape in your guys' eyes?
I mean, it's obviously a big deal right off the bat. Justin Fields, probably the number 2 Heisman candidate right now. I know Clemson probably with Trevor Lawrence and Travis Etienne, they have 2 of the top 4 for sure, but Justin Fields coming back on the Heisman scene's big. And then really the Big Ten, like those Michigan, Ohio State, Wisconsin, like regardless of how good those teams are in a given year, and they're all usually really good, like those are just foundational pieces of the college football puzzle. And it's Nebraska too. It's just weird now. I mean, the Big Ten has so many storied teams that regardless of their national success, it's not the same season without those teams. It's like the Pac-12 where you can get rid of all of them and like maybe people be like, oh, where's USC at? Like you need those Big Ten teams around to have it feel like a real college football season.
And then Tim, my question to you is, if the Big Ten obviously continues with this scheduling, obviously 8 games, 8 weeks directly into a conference championship game, what are some of the roadblocks and issues they can run into with this scheduling model as late as it is in the game here?
I definitely think so. The first two that are very clear are, obviously weather, and I hate to say it, COVID-19. A team has an issue with COVID-19, and they have it spread throughout the team. I mean, that team might essentially have the end of their season. That's 2 weeks where they can't really play, and with that tight schedule, you can't really do anything about it.
It's a big issue, yeah.
It's a huge issue. And I mean, even like if Ohio State gets COVID-19, that whole Ohio State might be out.
I don't see a 6-0 Ohio State team as good as they might be. I think it would be pretty ridiculous to put them over even at like a 10-2 Auburn or a 10-2 Florida that doesn't even win their division.
Right. And there's another issue that might not seem as, clear, but players' health. When you're playing 8 games in a row without a bye week and you're just going, that's going to affect each player significantly, as, football is a very tough and very tolling sport on a person's body. Injuries will be more significant or more frequent even. So I think that's another roadblock that's kind of coming in, where you have such a tight schedule. Everybody's got to play each week, and it's going to be really tough to get past. I think the team that really fights through it, the team that really goes hard and has a team that has the depth to be able to replace players and have the next man up mentality, that's the team that's going to be able to succeed. It's a whole different season. This is not a regular college football season. This is a season where, the fourth string player better be ready.
And this is going to be an interesting season for Big Ten, because you can see some teams like Minnesota, Iowa that are always on the cusp of being something big. I know I saw Dylan McCaffrey's out now from Michigan. So many big name players at these big name schools are just sitting out so they don't hurt their pro draft stock. This could potentially create a situation where you see some Phoenix Suns style run from some smaller, less thought of school in the Big Ten.
It's potential. It is certainly a possibility. However, I think when you're talking potentially playing a 7-8 game season, or maybe even a 5 or 6 game season, you're looking at the big schools that have to go undefeated, that have to completely blow out their opponents and completely shred the divisional opponent in the conference title game. There's really no room for error. I mean, we say that in a 12-game season, but as far as, the other major conferences going undefeated and then a one-loss, conference, appearance from one of the other teams, like a Georgia or somebody, or a Texas or a Florida or somebody, there's very little margin for error. So outside of the favorite Ohio State, just in a few words, run down any potential teams. If you guys don't think there's any,
I think Minnesota is a team to obviously watch.
That's what I was getting at.
I think they were probably one of the teams last year that looked really, really good. But I mean, other than that, if Dylan McCaffrey's out for Michigan, I don't know how they're going to be able to recover. I don't know what that's going to look like.
So that could indicate he might have lost that starting job in the first place. But
right.
So Michigan
State, Penn
most
State.
Years, Michigan's in there,
usual.
but they're behind Ohio State by a lot.
I think Penn State has certainly the potential. And of course, Wisconsin, certainly this type of football, Wisconsin and Iowa, it might play to their advantage. But wide open Big Ten, of course, if you pretend that Ohio State isn't there. But more than likely, let's be honest, it'll probably be Ohio State.
Yeah.
So that is it for this portion of the podcast. So next up, we've got a fan favorite. We've got the weekly pick'ems with Paul Hires. We're going to welcome Paul Hires onto the show. How are you doing?
Love that Husker football is back. Go Big Red, baby.
All right, so let's get right into this pick'em. We've only got 4 picks this week, 1 basketball series, and then 3 NFL matchups. First up, LA Lakers against the Denver Nuggets in the NBA Western Conference Finals. The series that was finally set up by a great series between Denver and the Clippers. No Battle of Los Angeles, but again, Lakers Nuggets. Jared, Joseph, and Tim all have the Lakers. Will, who's your pick?
I'll take the Lakers too. As much as I may, in the bottom of my heart, want to pick the Nuggets, I just can't see them taking this first game. They got to wait till it's 3-1 to start winning.
Yeah, and hats off to the Nuggets for coming back 3-1. But I think LeBron and AD take this one in 6 or 7. I got the Lakers.
All right, so I don't know if I just feel good about the Nuggets all of a sudden, or or sympathy, or what I feel. But I mentioned it earlier that this team kind of reminds me of the way the Spurs play, and I love this type of basketball. I love the way Jokic plays. I love Murray's intensity. And I think the Lakers are a bit old and defensively lazy.
They're a worse team than people give them credit for.
Yeah, so I know the league is going to have things be quite imbalanced foul-wise because they're going to want this to be a huge celebration of Kobe, and the Lakers would win the same year, and it'd be the 10-year anniversary of the last time the Lakers played. There's a whole lot of narratives that the league would really, really, really love to set up here. But you know who's going to destroy all those dreams? Mike Malone, the Joker, and his pal Murray. They got to come up with a good Batman villain nickname for him. Going with the Nuggets. That's a tough one, though. Next up, we've got the Broncos at the Steelers Sunday at noon on CBS. Jared, Joseph, and Tim all going with the Steelers. Will, who's your pick?
I'm going to take the Broncos. I am all in on Drew Lock. I know I usually have the unpopular.
Would you say that you're locked in on
I would
Drew?
say I'm locked in. I know this looks bad for me considering I believe in Danny Dimes and Josh Allen, but like, come on now. I thought Drew Lock was the best quarterback in that draft class, aside from Murray. I just feel good about the Broncos. If their offense clicks, they could totally win. And the Steelers also, like, you can usually count on them to play down to the level of competition and make some dumb mistakes late. So I think the Broncos can sneak this one away.
Yeah, I've got to go with Pittsburgh on this one. I agree with what you're saying, but I think the Pittsburgh offense is really coming back. I think you guys mentioned last week in your NFL playoff predictions, both of you had Pittsburgh in as a wild card. I think this is a playoff team. Big Ben is back to what his performance was before his injury. I think Snell is a good addition in the running game. I got the Steelers.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. I'll pick the Steelers. I think these teams are more evenly matched than people would like to admit, considering the quarterback matchup. When you look at these teams from a larger scale, I think they're really evenly matched. I just have to go with the Steelers based on the defense and the experience. So I'll go with Pittsburgh on that one. Next matchup we have Minnesota at Indianapolis, Sunday at noon on Fox. Jared, Joseph, and Tim all picking the Vikings. Will, who's your pick?
I'm going to take the Vikings because as much as I want to believe the Colts lost on Sunday because Gardner Minshew is this ascending talent who's going to lead the Jaguars to the promised land, that's really most likely not the case, as much as I like him as a quarterback.
You got to believe.
You do got to believe, but at the same time, I think the Colts, I don't think that was a sign of how good the Jaguars were. I think it's a sign of how ineffective the Colts were. It's going to be an interesting matchup for me, considering Phillip Rivers throws a lot of picks, but Minnesota, as we mentioned earlier, does not really have much secondary to speak of. So,
yeah, and at the same time, we talked about the Vikings and the Packers. The Packers you've got at number 6 in your power rankings. Vikings only lost to them by 9. I think the Vikings take this one.
And I would have to tend to agree. I think the Vikings will figure things out as far as what was wrong after week 1 with the Packers. That was not a good matchup for them. But I think the Vikings will figure things out. I told you guys this in the season preview stuff. The Colts are not who we think they are. Sorry to quote Dennis Green, but yeah, sweep it. Vikings, go put your money on the Colts. Next up, we've got the New England Patriots at the Seattle Seahawks Sunday Night Football, 7 p.m. on NBC. Jared, Joseph, and Tim all going with the Seahawks. Will, your pick?
Pure and simple. I don't think Cam Newton can handle the Seahawks defense. I don't think the Patriots defense can handle Russell Wilson. The Seahawks should win this pretty easily.
I know everyone's thinking about it, but the rematch of Super Bowl 49 and the Seahawks decision on that inside the 5 play there. But yeah, I mean, Russell Wilson, enough said, right? 4 touchdowns, 4 incompletions in his last game on 35 attempts. Unbelievable play by Russell Wilson. They win this one at home.
All right, so hear me out.
I'll listen.
So Cam Newton, he's got an MVP.
Okay.
Right? And Russell Wilson? Can we get a stat on that? Does Russell Wilson have an MVP?
I do believe he has no MVPs.
He does not have an
more
MVP.
Super Bowl than Cam Newton. No
He
MVP.
does. But Bill Belichick happens to have 5 more Super Bowls than Pete Carroll. And listen, I'm just looking for an excuse to pick the Patriots, and I'm also looking for an excuse to prevent the second clean sweep of the day. In the same way, I feel good about the Nuggets. I feel good about the Patriots because it's just fun to watch them play with this new play style with Cam Newton. And I think it's unique enough and has enough wrinkles that teams haven't seen a Bill Belichick offense run that it could catch them off guard. And the New England secondary has enough of their guys back, and they were as stout as they were last season, that they will be able to semi-contain Russell Wilson. This is not a confident pick, but it's a Patriots pick nonetheless. In Bill, we trust. Thank you. So, Paul, thank you so much for joining us on Pick'ems. And Will, thank you so much for joining us on this entire portion of the podcast. We'll see you guys next week.
Yep, we should have some stats for you in a couple weeks.
Stat time is back, baby.
All right. And next up, we're going to welcome in Joseph Farina to the podcast, and we're going to wrap things up like we always do with some news from around the European football world.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Yeah, and so last week we did a bit of an EPL preview. So this week, let's get into the Bundesliga. So you got some players to watch for us?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you'll see there's a kind of a common theme among them. Alphonso Davies. He's a left back for Bayern Munich. The kid is 19 years old, and yet he had 29 appearances with 8 direct goal contributions, 3 goals and 5 assists. And he's 19, okay? Which is just insane. As of, I think it was today, it might have been yesterday, was just named to the Golden Boy Final 14 under the age of 21, the best player in the world. And personally, I think that he's a favorite. If not this year, definitely next year. He's one of the best players in the world, honestly. Next up, we've got Jadon Sancho, center mid from England. He plays for Borussia Dortmund. And this past year, he had 32 appearances. Listen to this, 17 goals, 16 assists. 32 games, 33 direct goal contributions for a midfielder. That is ridiculous. So he's one of the best players in all of Europe, let alone in Germany. And he's only 20 years old. Also up for that Golden Boy Final 40. I think that probably this year, just because it is his last year, I think they'll probably wind up giving it to him or the next guy, Erling Haaland. He's a forward also for Borussia Dortmund. He only had 15 appearances, but he made them count with 13 goals and 2 assists in those games, which is some Lewandowski numbers. I could absolutely talk about him as well, but if you're following the Bundesliga, you know who he is absolutely already. So he's been crazy this past year. He was a little quiet during the restart, but I still think that, there was a little bit of excuses to be made there. So I think that he'll definitely come back. But surprise, surprise, he's also up for that Golden Boy award. So watch out for the 3 of those guys in this next season.
Right, and the reason we're doing the Bundesliga preview, obviously, is because the Bundesliga starts this weekend. Some big matchups. We've got Borussia Dortmund and Borussia Mönchengladbach playing. And then on Friday, actually, at 1 o'clock on ESPN, so you can watch that, Bayern Munich opens the season against Schalke. So just give me a rundown of those 2 matchups, just some things to watch for in those games.
Yeah, for starters, Bayern versus Schalke. This is Bayern's first game, obviously, to begin their title defense. And I think that a little bit of a talking point we'll see will be Schalke beginning their life without Weston McKennie, the American who left for Juventus. They were already a pretty poor team with him. I think this could be a really bad sign of things to come. They could be getting relegated, which I don't think anyone who follows the Bundesliga would like to see. They're a very, very big team, and to see them get relegated would be really shocking, honestly. But honestly, this should be a straightforward win for Bayern, in my opinion. For the other game, Dortmund versus Mönchengladbach, both teams finished in the top 4 last season. It was pretty close, actually. And Dortmund, in these last 6 games against Borussia Mönchengladbach, have won all of them. So this has been pretty one-sided, but I think that Dortmund should win, but don't be surprised if there is an upset. Mönchengladbach, their front 3, their top 2 players in there are Thuram and Plea, and they have 20 goals and 18 assists between them. The 2 of them have just been phenomenal, and they're very underrated in the European football scene.
All right, so let's do our top 4 prediction. Why don't you do your 4, I'll do my 4, 3, 3, 2, 2, and then Bayern.
Absolutely. So at 4, I went with RB Leipzig. I think that they lose Timo Werner and they don't really have a direct replacement for him, at least not at that ridiculous level. He's a phenomenal player. And then they're potentially going to lose Upamecano as well. So I think that there's some big holes that they're going to need to fill, and I don't see them filling them.
I tend to agree with you, but I've got Mönchengladbach at 4. I understand that they have a great system that they play through, and certainly aren't losing the talent that Leipzig is losing. But I tend to think that Leipzig is just another class up from Mönchengladbach. Also, playing European football tends to be of a detriment to those teams that are just barely on the cusp for even qualifying for it. So they're going to be a bit spread thin, especially around the time the group stage is being played. So I think they'll slip up there a little bit. But I've got them still qualifying for next season. Gladbach at 4, your pick for 3.
Gladbach. I think that Thuram and Playa are deadly. I touched on it earlier, but I really think that they will be very good, especially after last season. They finished with 4 wins out of their last 6 to end the season. And I think that people are sleeping on them, yourself included. No shots, but you know. And I think that they'll be a very good team. They could potentially even challenge my number 2 spot.
So yeah, I've got Leipzig at 3. I tend to believe that, yes, Timo Werner is a great player, but I think Leipzig has a lot of good talent all around. Yusuf Poulsen and Marcel Sabitzer are certainly not replacements for Timo Werner, and neither is Patrick Schick, but I tend to believe that their defense is much stronger than Mönchengladbach. And I really think, especially if things aren't going the way that they should be going, you could even see Leipzig spend 10 or 20 million euros in the winter to try and solve any issues that they could have. But I think they just have a far greater reach resource-wise than Mönchengladbach, both in potential players coming in at the end of this summer or in the winter, and then as far as what they already have on roster. Again, like you said, even with losing Werner and Upamecano. So who's your number 2 spot?
At 2, I have Dortmund. Big surprise there. And I really think that those 2 guys that I touched on earlier, Haaland and Sancho, will just be so good for them. And it's going to be very difficult for anyone who doesn't have those superstars in their roster to really compete with them. Mönchengladbach, I think, will come close just because I see them being a little bit more consistent. Dortmund has typically had a problem with consistency in the past. And I think that will just keep them from reaching the heights of their southern rivals, if you will. But I think that Dortmund at number 2 is a pretty safe bet.
Yeah, I agree with you. Dortmund at 2 for pretty much everything you mentioned, assuming they don't lose Sancho here towards the end of the summer. But that's looking quite unlikely. And really, at this point, they're just trying to inflate. And I hate to say inflate because Haaland and Sancho are such great players. But this is really a play to sell season for them. And it's unfortunate that Dortmund can't continue to accumulate talent, or at least talent of the level that they're deserving of accumulating. But certainly they play them well while they have them. So Dortmund at 2, your number 1 pick. Surprise, surprise.
Yeah, I don't think that this is going to be a shock to anyone. Bayern, they're going for 9 in a row. And honestly, that's the standard, and it is to be expected this year. They've got key players everywhere that you can name, and they're going to be the best players on any roster in the Bundesliga, honestly. You know, Serge Gnabry, Leroy Sané, Alphonso Davies, and then you can even go with the superstar players like Lewandowski and Muller and Neuer. They're just stacked at every single position, and I think that when you have a team that's possibly one of the best in the world, to have them not win in Germany would just be unreal. It's not possible.
I completely agree with you. Bayern will go for their 9th straight Bundesliga title defense. That's an unreal number in any sports sphere. But German football is Bayern Munich football at this point. Like you mentioned, if you were to make an all Bundesliga team, you could really build it with the entire Bayern starting 11. And even if you're being generous, you'd probably still have to put 8 or 9 Bayern players on that starting 11. They're not only dominant in the Bundesliga, but obviously they're a European power, which is what lends them to being such a great German team. So yeah, Bayern far and away the best team in Germany right now. So let's shift over to England and do a little EPL Week 1 review. So your thoughts on some of the matchups. Let's start with Liverpool Leeds, a game that was far closer than it should have been and a lot more high scoring than it should have been.
Absolutely. Not to toot my own horn, I was very proud that I picked this one because when I was watching this game, every time that a goal was going in, my blood pressure was going through the roof. It was so cool to watch, and I loved it. Liverpool did win. They beat Leeds 4-3. But let's not forget, Leeds were phenomenal in this game. To score 3 goals against the defending champions is something that, do not hold against them that they lost. This was a very valiant effort. Jack Harrison and Patrick Bamford played phenomenal for them. And the only point that I really think that they could maybe get a little bit better or improve would be their goalkeeper. He didn't seem to be anything spectacular to me. So I think if they are going to maybe push for anything higher than mid-table, they're going to need to sort that out either now or in the January transfer window. The other talking points, Salah's hat trick. As a forward, in my playing days, I guess, you never hold 2 pens against a forward. You score them, so they're goals, and a hat trick is always impressive. So I think you touched on it a couple episodes ago, or if not last episode. He could potentially win the Golden Boot again. Always starting off strong with a hat trick is a good sign of things to come. But on the defensive side of the ball, Liverpool was just poor. I mean, Van Dijk was something that we haven't seen. Last year, there were certain bits and pieces where you were like, oh, he's not the player that he was 2 seasons ago. But in this game, he was just a liability, really. He was holding them back, and he was just not playing well. He directly led to one of the Leeds goals. So,
well, yeah, Van Dijk aside, I mentioned this last week that losing Lovren and James Milner, who's a very deep-lying playmaker, Liverpool's just going on and pretending as if nothing's happening, as if Sepp van den Berg is the next heir at center back next to Van Dijk, and we're not, we're pretending that that certain players are able to fit into certain roles that they're not able to. Who's the center back that is actually a right back? Is it Joe Williams that I'm thinking of? Yeah, that he's a right back, and they've been trying to play him at center back consistently for 2 seasons, and it simply does not fit. He's not a center back. And as another big issue, I think, for Liverpool is the fullbacks are so progressive in their attacking phase that they're left quite vulnerable to a high press counterattack side like Leeds. Not every team has the pace or the willingness in general to press and to go on the attack so quickly. So Liverpool is able to get away with it. But also, I don't know why they're going after Thiago right now in the transfer market. They need to go after a sit and defend center back, a screener, a maybe not someone that can play in a double pivot, but certainly a defensive midfielder that could sit back and play deep and act as a third center back when Robertson and Alexander-Arnold go into the opposing box. You cannot simply sit with 2 defenders back there, which was a big issue against the Leeds. So let's go into the next matchup that was quite interesting. Spurs against Everton.
Yeah, this was a belter of a game, even though it only ended 1-0. James, Allen, and Doucouré were phenomenal. All 3 of them just are signings of the season, honestly. The 3 of them played phenomenal together. They were linking up play very, very well. And players like Calvert-Lewin and Richarlison, who for the past couple of years have looked to be kind of stranded up there, were getting service, and they were playing like the superstars that they were hyped up to be. So I think that this Everton team really should be pushing for a spot in European football. And if they keep it going like this, they could even be getting into the Champions League if they keep at this.
That's a bold claim.
It is. It absolutely.
And
is,
on the other end, the Spurs, they looked completely unimaginative. The game was uneventful as far as their attacking prowess. Watching Mourinho coach Spurs is like watching paint dry. I mean, it's dreadful how he is so and I know it's one game, but we saw this at the end of last year and during the restart. so underutilizes the pace and the technique and the efficiency of the players he has. And it's painful to watch, honestly, the type of football he's indoctrinating within the Spurs organization.
Yeah, it did seem a little forced when they hired him. You know, they had Pochettino, who seemed to fit their style of play almost perfectly, and then they fired him after a couple poor results. But Mourinho just seemed to be like, oh, he's a superstar manager. Let's get him on the job. And
yeah, certainly
I don't
seemed
think he
interesting.
fits.
Yeah, he doesn't fit the culture, the play style whatsoever. It really seems like you said, like they're forcing it. And then to the final game we'll discuss, Chelsea and Brighton. Your thoughts on that matchup?
Yeah, it's a tale of two debuts, honestly. Werner and Havertz. Werner played very well. He earned a penalty kick that Jorginho scored. But Havertz was just, he was very, very poor. He had one key pass and one dribble completed compared with 3 dispossessions. So he was giving the ball away more than he was keeping it. But I think that he was a very good player in the Bundesliga. I think he'll pick it up over time. It does take some time to adjust to life in the Premier League. But as of right now, he does not seem to be Premier League ready.
Yeah, and then another running complaint I've had throughout this show, get rid of Kepa. Not a Premier League quality goalkeeper. Maybe for Burnley, but not for the mighty Chelsea FC. Get him out of here. Get Mendy in.
Yeah, I think that once that deal is completed, it's going to be game over for Kepa.
He's going to become part of the loan army.
Yeah,
of Chelsea FC.
If they don't try to just sell him to anybody that will give him or give them 30 mil.
For what though? I don't know if he's even worth 30 mil. They need to take him out on loan, send it back to Spain, and have him rehabilitate his image.
Well, I think that you'll get somebody who will buy him because I do still think that he's a quality keeper. That the goal that he conceded in this game, kind of iffy. There was a view of it from behind the goal where Kepa didn't see it at all, but you can blame it on poor positioning, I guess. I think that it was kind of iffy whether or not it goes in, but it was a good goal, and Kepa probably should have gotten to it. So I think that in the next coming days or weeks, he will be replaced by Mendy, and I don't think that's really up for debate anymore.
It's not. And you know what else isn't up for debate? The fact that you should like and subscribe to this channel. Hope you enjoyed the content. Shameless pandering. Joseph, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that's it for today's episode. Again, thank you so much for joining us. Wherever you were and however you listened or watched, thank you so much for joining us. As always, I'm your host, Marko Jerkovic. Thank you, and we'll see you next week.